Senate and Assembly Republicans this week in Albany unveiled a package of legislation for the new session, including several bills they say are needed to address public safety and a spike in crime that has happened over the past couple of years since lawmakers passed bail reform.
There is an alternative to the madness we have seen. There is an alternative to a focus on criminals as opposed to victims.
Senate Minority Leader Rob Ortt and his fellow Republicans are calling for the repeal of cashless bail and giving judges the discretion once again of setting or denying bail. They're also calling for more resources to support law enforcement, as well as mental health, addiction, and poverty programs. And Republican State Senator Dan Stec joins us now. Happy New Year. It's good to see you. Welcome.
You too, Tom. Happy New Year.
We heard Governor Hochul's State of the State this past week and her agenda for the new legislative session. And as we just heard, your leader, Rob Ortt, outlined one of the Senate Republicans' top priorities, public safety and bail reform.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something, I'm not in the business to want to tell anyone I told you so or we told you so. But the truth is that when this was done and crammed in as part of the budget, which is a whole other story. That's not a place for big policy changes. A budget should be a budget on its own. But we said, this is an accident waiting to happen. This is going to be a revolving door. The worst part about it that we pointed out then is no one talked to the sheriffs, no one talked to the district attorneys. And guess what? There are Republican and Democrat sheriffs and DAs all across the state. So it's not a partisan group that we're talking to. But no one bothered to ask them, hey, what is this going to mean if we do this? We're all for making improvements. But what we did here is we went too far. The legislature and the governor went way too far. And now we've had enough time behind us where we're starting to see, the statistics show that violent crime is up, and 50% of the people that are released under the bail reforms are recommitting offenses.
Do you think this is something Democrats are willing to sit down and talk about, at least making changes, looking at changes?
Well, if they're smart and they want to win elections, they should be.
What are some of the other top priorities for you for the new session?
Well, we still are on the wrong end of a lot of things if you start benchmarking New York State across the country. We're one of the highest tax states. We're one of the most regulated states. We led the country in out-migration. Governor Hochul
pointed out. We heard her mention that during the State of the State.
She mentioned it and highlighted it. Again, her predecessor would have never mentioned that. But at the end of the day, if somebody wants to get a feel for, hey, how are things going in a state, look at how people are voting with their feet. If your state is doing well and flourishing, you're going to have a growing population. If you're not getting it right, people are going to be leaving. We had 300,000 people leave New York State last year.
Were there things in the State of the State that you heard and you liked?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was encouraged that Governor Hochul acknowledged that we're not finished with broadband build out and was willing to earmark another $1 billion for it. Now, the previous initial investment was $500 million. So to say, hey, we're not finished, and oh, by the way, I'm going to put $1 billion towards this, that's a significant acknowledgement that we're not done there. And I think in the North Country, in a lot of our rural areas, but certainly in the Adirondacks, it's the cell service and broadband are two huge issues that are holding us back economically and are also a contributor to public safety concern. So that was one of the things that I was, significant things that I was encouraged by. A smaller dollar amount, thankfully a smaller population we're talking about, the Joseph P. Dwyer Veterans Peer-to-Peer Funding, veterans counseling for PTSD and traumatic brain injury. These are, thankfully, it's not a lot of people, which means it's also not a lot of money, but the most deserving, I think. Somebody that raised their hand, took an oath, volunteered, served and sacrificed, and significantly, that are suffering from PTSD. If we can help them, we should. The previous governor, he would take that money out of his budget every year and make the legislature beg and negotiate to get it back. Governor Hochul, to her credit, not only did she say we're going to continue it, she started by saying she wants to increase it.
She talked about tax credits for farmers, farm workers, small businesses.
$212 billion state budget. 2 years ago it was $173 billion. So it's taken a significant jump in the last couple of years. I don't want to get too political here, but there's been a sea change as to who's in charge in Albany 2 years ago, and we're seeing that now. And again, a lot of people are starting to leave. it's killing our small businesses, so that the governor is willing to say, hey, I acknowledge that we've got an issue here and we need to do something on the tax front for our businesses so that they're competitive with other businesses that don't have the burdens that historically New York businesses have. Mentioning farms, one of the concerns I have wasn't mentioned in the governor's State of the State. The Labor Board is looking at reducing the overtime threshold from 60 hours a week to 40 hours a week. That would kill a lot of farms, and that's also a bipartisan issue. There's people on both sides of the aisle in the Albany that realize that this is not a good thing. I think a lot of people at home that may not be familiar with farms are thinking, well, of course, if you work more than 40 hours a week, you should get overtime. I do, and the ag sector is very different. It's seasonal, and again, we are in a competitive market with other states. I'm glad that the Labor Board postponed that decision from December to January. I hope that they're paying attention, because if they lower that threshold, it's going to kill a lot of farms.
Did you like the tone she set as compared to what you've heard from the governor in past years?
Oh yeah, look, I don't think there's anyone in Albany on any side of the aisle that would say, that wouldn't say that this was a welcome change in demeanor and attitude and professionalism and poise. I mean, I'll take nice 8 days a week. I mean, there's a lot that you can work with somebody that's nice and professional and polite, and certainly we have that now in this governor.
She mentioned $1 billion tax cut for the middle class, another $1 billion in property tax cuts for about 2 million homeowners. You mentioned the $1 billion to expand broadband. Are you worried that there's too much spending in this?
Well, that's
in
just
this budget, in this agenda.
Her budget is going to be released next week on Tuesday, so we will start to see those hard numbers. But the point is, at $212 billion, that's the state's current budget. That's more than the budgets of Texas and Florida combined. The $212 billion New York State budget is almost as large as the California budget, and they have almost twice as many people. So we are spending way too much.
Is there any hope Governor Hochul may reconsider plans to close 6 prisons in the coming weeks, including Mariah Shack? Just a year after the closing of the annex at Clinton Correctional, you and other lawmakers have expressed concerns over closing more North Country prisons, especially with 3 former prisons here in the North Country sitting idle right now. But realistically, is there anything the legislature can do to stop this? This was part of last year's budget,
Yep.
But anything that can be done at this point to try to get the governor to reconsider?
Legislatively, there's not a fix to this. This was done as a practical matter. This was done as part of the budget. Again, this is not the kind of stuff that should be in a budget. I mean, I could write a book on the stuff that New York does as part of the budget. It's a $212 billion budget. Let's focus on expenses and revenues. But in our budget, that's where we do the rest of the year's legislation, because that's where all the controversial and difficult stuff gets stuck into a budget, and then the $212 billion becomes leverage for all these other ideas. But legally, is it possible for the legislature to step in here? Yes. As a practical matter, no. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle love closing prisons. They're not going to unring this bell. This governor's not going to want to unring the bell either. So now we're back to, okay, she's announced, I'm closing these 6 prisons. Could she change her mind? Absolutely, she could change her mind. So, the energy that I'm putting into, and I'm encouraging others that are still trying to make the case here, is to continue to focus that on the second floor and on the governor. The legislature isn't in a position to undo this. With that said, you made the point, and absolutely, you got Lion Mountain, Chateaugay, Mount McGregor, that have all Camp Gabriel's, which I have got a constitutional memo on, that have sat idle for years. And I made that point when this closure list came out. They said, we're going to close this, but don't worry, everyone that works here is going to have a job, and don't worry about the community. We're going to take care of the community. DOCS, the Department of Corrections, and the governors, this one before, have a horrible record of having any credibility on the subject of what happens when they close a prison, because they all say, we're going to do something, we're not going to let this sit idle, and I can take you to 4, within a couple hours driving distance of where I live, 3 in my district, that are falling apart. And now, specifically to Mariah Shack in my district, now this was the place where the people that didn't like traditional incarceration and corrections created. They wanted to get away from just lock them up, throw away the key, and punish them. So Mariah was created in the 80s. Mariah and 6 or 7 others were created to treat this low-level, low-violent nip it in the bud before it gets out of hand, save these guys, because a year of incarceration in a prison is very expensive. Mariah Shock and these other shock programs condensed it to a 6-month program. So there was a lot of money being saved by the state taxpayer on low-level guys that were savable. All right, so this is what the left wanted. Why wouldn't you have more shock treatment? And that is exactly the case that myself and Assemblyman Simpson have been trying to make. We've met a couple times with people on the second floor. I'm still trying to get a meeting with Governor Hochul to talk about this. It's not too late to stop this. Once they close that and that building sits idle, the state of New York won't do anything with it, because that is their track record. And again, the need is still there for these inmates to get the shock treatment, the drug and alcohol programs, the discipline, and their recidivism rate at the shock programs is much better than traditional incarceration. So there's every reason in the world to have more of these, not less of them. And that's the case we're trying to make to the governor.
The independent commission set up to take the politics out of redistricting has by many accounts failed in its mission. It couldn't agree on a single bipartisan plan on how to redraw the political boundaries for the state assembly, the state senate, and congressional districts. So the IRC sent 2 versions to the legislature that got voted down. Both of them got voted down by both the assembly and the senate this week. So what's next? It goes back to the commission, take one more stab at it?
Right. So where we are now is there is no map, and it's back in the redistricting commission's hands, and they have about 2 weeks to come up with another set of maps. One map would be ideal. That's what the public wants. You know, the public created this by constitutional amendment in 2014. They wanted to take the politics out of drawing these lines. So the voter of the state of New York, not the legislature, the voter said, yes, create this commission. So the expectation is we want them to produce a single map saying this is it. It may not be ideal. I may not love what mine looks like, but you know, the thought was that it would be drawn independently and fairly, and everyone would say, yeah, there's some good, there's some bad, but this is fair. They could do that. They may do again what they did. They may say, here's 2 more maps. Or they may not even give us a map. In which case, if we can't agree on a map from the redistricting commission, then the law says it goes back to the legislature, which is what the voters said they wanted to get away from in 2014. So I'm hopeful that in these next 2 weeks, the redistricting commission will finish their work, come up with a set of maps, and we can vote on them. I think that would be the preferred course. I don't think that it's in the interest of the state of New York to just let the legislature draw these maps.
If the Democrats who are in control, both the Senate and the Assembly, vote on what they want, the map that was put forward by the Democrats on the commission changed your district dramatically. In fact, it takes you out of the North Country and out of the 45th district and creates a district that runs almost down to the Pennsylvania border. Glens Falls and Queensbury stay, but the North Country becomes a much larger district. And would Patty Ritchie be the incumbent in the new 45th?
In that map,
under that plan?
In that plan, Patty Ritchie would be the incumbent. And of course, it's very possible at the end of the day, especially the congressional maps, because we have to shed 1 seat. So that map has to look very differently. And there's a lot riding. I mean, there's a lot of people that are pointing to New York as part of the the Alamo for congressional Democrats to hold the majority. These redistrictings the pressure on these maps is more impact in Washington than Albany. And because of that, there's a good chance that a lot of this is going to end up in court. I mean, 10 years ago, those maps went to court. Now the courts won't sit on them a long time. I mean, there's a political reality of a political calendar. We have a political calendar to think about. So courts will take this up and they will deal with it. But again, that could be avoided if the redistricting commission does its job, comes up with a good set of maps that people can point to and say it passes legal muster, it passes constitutional muster. And again, then maybe individual lawmakers will or won't like their lines, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.